Okay, we're now going to look at the first of Sorley MacLean's sort of nature poems from the collection of six SQA mandated poems, and this is going to be Kinloch Ainort. I'm not exactly sure if that's how you pronounce it correctly, but in any case, uh, this poem deals with MacLean's sort of take on nature, and it relates to his deep love for Scotland and the land in Scotland. And essentially what he does in this poem is he kind of lays out the Scottish landscape in a way which sort of demonstrates its like great power, and um it's almost okay, so to begin with, the entire poem is like personifies nature. So that's the first thing. Personification is running throughout the entire poem from beginning to end. And what he does, alongside sort of illustrating the sort of beauty and majesty and amazingness of nature in the Scottish landscape. The other thing he does, okay, is he basically takes the Scottish landscape and he makes it, like I said, he personifies it. He makes it appear alive, and he makes it appear alive with a sort of almost aggressive type of energy. There's a lot of words in here which relate to like war and relate to being like a warrior, being sort of being fierce, those kind of things. So he kind of, you could say in a way, he captures the spirit of Scotland and the land itself. How it was classically thought about in terms of Scotland is like a wild place. It's like a place of danger, but of beauty, but also danger. And those would be sort of themes which, were which we saw in his other poems when he's talking about Scottish women, who he describes as being sort of extremely beautiful, but also dangerous in terms of breaking his heart and, leading to him being extremely depressed, etc., etc. When he mentioned, for example, the arrows alongside the beauty in I Gave You Immortality. Okay, so anyway, in this poem, like I said, he personifies nature and he describes it in a very sort of powerful way. He says, "A company of mountains, an upthrust of mountains, a great garth of growing mountains, a concourse of summits, of knolls, of hills, coming on with a fearsome roaring." A company of mountains. So a company again is that's military word choice. Company is the sort of group of soldiers. It's what you use to describe soldiers, is company of soldiers. An upthrust. Upthrust is what you do with a spear or a sword when you stab someone. A great garth of growing mountains, a concourse of summits, of knolls, of hills, coming on with a fearsome roaring. So the land itself is alive, and the land is almost aggressive. It's wild. It's like not necessarily like a predator, but it's like basically like a wild and strong like animal or like an army, something like that. Um, no, why is he doing this? Why is he turning the land into something sort of strong and fierce in this way? I'm not exactly sure. But it does kind of go, and it does kind of go back, or take us back to sort of, like I said, the old ways of looking at Scotland as like a wild place, a place of danger, a place. For example, the Romans conquered much of Britain, but they didn't conquer Scotland, which has always been something of like an issue of pride for like Scottish people. And um, in terms of like the Romans had this huge empire, but they weren't able to conquer the people in Scotland, because the people in Scotland were very like sort of wild, and they lived up in the mountains, and it was a place of fierceness, like that old sort of Celtic spirit, yeah, like that old Scottish spirit is one of the wilderness, like that. Excuse me. Like for example, some people till this day they still call Scotland like the last wild place in the UK. Excuse me. It's like going along with all of those ideas. Okay. Excuse me. Goes on to say, A rising of glens of gloomy corries, and that's a corrie, what you see that picture, it's a corrie. A lying down in the antlered bellowing. So obviously bellowing is what the stag does. It's the male deer. When he's making, they make that noise, that deep noise. Crocodiles and other type of animals, they do it too. That deep sort of noise that emanates from their bellies, which is what I call bellowing. It's like a very masculine and it's like I guess aggressive. It's like powerful. It's dominant. So he's saying that the land itself is doing that. It's doing that. A stretching of green nooks of brook mazes, prattling in the age-old midwinter. So the water in the land, the water in the land is moving with strength and dominance and moving throughout and walking throughout the age-old midwinter. That the water itself moves around. The brook is a type of it's a small kind of stream. It's moving around the land and it's doing what it's always done. Age old means ancient. Midwinter, so the water itself is doing what it's always done. This meaning that the land has been here for a very long time, and the land has been strong and dominant for a very long time. Um, it's interesting in this poem. There's no mention of human beings at all, which is sort of like an interesting break from the other poetry, which at least mentions a woman or is centered on a woman. The object of his desire. In this poem, there's no mention of any human beings. It's just sort of like pure nature, and it's sort of capturing, like I said, the landscape itself, pure Scotland, captured the spirit of Scotland, captured in the lines of poetry. A cavalry again, sort of military personification, military imagery here. A cavalry of mountains, horse riding summits. So horse riding. I guess in a way it could describe sort of the way that the mountains sort of slope up and down, up and down. It's almost like someone riding a horse. And it also connects to like I said, the military imagery, which we talked about a minute ago. Streaming headlong haste, a streaming headlong haste of foam, a slipperiness of smooth flat rocks, small-bellied bared summits, flat rock snoring of high mountains. So again, it's like the land itself is alive and it's marching, it's heading somewhere, it's got its own sort of energy, it's got its own mission, it's got its own purpose beyond humanity. It is a thing unto itself. Slipperiness of smooth flat rock, small bellied bare summits, flat rock snoring of high mountains. Uh, it's interesting as well. What he's doing is he's giving like a very varied sort of picture of Scotland and all of its different the elements of its landscape, the varied elements that you can see if you walk around in the countryside of Scotland. And if you go out of the city into the countryside, you can see all of these different elements in the landscape. And I guess in a way, him not mentioning any people in this poetry, it does also kind of reflect the reality of the Scottish landscape, which is actually quite empty in terms of there are pockets of people sort of here and there, but generally speaking, the Scottish landscape is big, but it's quite empty. There's only 5 million people that live in Scotland, as far as last checked. 5 million in total, and like most of them live in like cities and in like small towns, but the landscape itself is quite there's not really many people who actually live out in the landscape itself. There's a lot of quiet places, peaceful places that are sort of empty, and just sort of pure nature. That's what he's capturing in this poem as well. Okay, a surge belt of hilltops, impetuous thigh of peaks, impetuous. The murmuring bareness of marching turrets, the murmuring bareness of marching turrets. Green flanks of moss, Gary, that's that hill that you can see. Crumbling storm flanks, barbarous pinnacles of high moorland. So again, sort of capturing military word choice, marching turrets, and barbarous capturing wilderness. So barbarous is the same word as barbarian, and it's what was used to refer to people in North Africa who were called the Barbary pirates, and um, whether barbarian comes from Barbary or Barbary comes from barbarian, I'm not sure which way it goes. I just know that they're associated one with the other. Essentially, it's like wild people. That's the idea, like the wild people. Um, so again, it just sort of tying in again with the idea of the land itself being wild. Um, impetuous. I'm pretty sure impetuous means something that can't be dominated or something. Let me just double check. Something that can't be, what do you call it? Put down. It's like rebellious. It's like rebellious, impetuous. It means like rebellious or something like that. Huh? Impulsive behavior, rash, it, like uncontrolled, something like that. Yeah, like uncontrolled, wild. That's impetuous. Huh? So it's like the land itself, surge belt of hilltops, impetuous dive of peaks. The land itself moves where it wants to. It spikes out of the ground where it wants to. It rises where it wants to. It's like the land itself, like I said again, it has that independent, wild energy, and also, so it's like that wild energy, but also it has a certain amount of danger to it, and ferocity, if you like, to it, which is captured in like the idea of crumbling storm flanks, a place you need to be careful. Barbarous pinnacles of high moorlands, barbarous, wild, and dangerous. So it's a nice short little poem. It's a nice short little poem. It just captures, like I said, the sort of wild spirit of Scotland, and the how the land itself is alive, and it's full of energy, full of uh rebellion, and it has its own mind. It's like a very independent place, which obviously these are all classic, ideas which have always been sort of tied to the idea or the nature of, Scotland. What is Scotland? It's a place. What is Scotland? Scotland is a place of independence. I'm not talking politically here in terms of like modern independence, but I mean, as in classically speaking, it's always been a place of independent life, independent thought. Um, it's one of the places where the Enlightenment took hold, early. Robert Burns is one of the considered an early Enlightenment figure. Um, it's a place where basically, many of our modern ideas which relate to individuality and so on come from. Like for example, Adam Smith was obviously Scottish, and his ideas around capitalism and private property. They form much of the foundation of like our ideas of today in terms of being an independent individual and so on. So anyway, Scotland has always been known as a sort of like independent place, a wild place, a place of beauty, but also a place of wilderness, and a place where civilization has a hard time taking hold in terms of, if civilization is seen as like a place of as like something which creates order or creates stability in terms of like predictability and so on. Scotland has always been seen as a place where it's like Rome, for example, the Roman civilization or the Roman civilizing army. And I don't mean that in terms of like it was better or worse. I mean it in terms of like going to a wild place and then taming it, and then making it from like a wild place of hills and mountains and all that into a place of, you know, uh, well laid out and what's the word? And mapped out cities which are created according to grids and proper boxes, which, are all patterned and symmetrical and all that. Scotland is a place which always sort of rebelled against that, and rebelled against sort of being controlled, etc., etc. So anyway, he captures all of that in this poem very nicely, and he also, you could read this poem and you could get a good idea of what Scotland is like, especially at the countryside, what it looks like, and it's almost like he walks you through it, through the poetry itself.